So that I'm glad that I experienced the 90s. For whatever reason, I was always aligned with my Indian side. It basically ends at my marriage. I'd never even seen a Bond film. Complex question, a complex answer. I wanted to be a writer since I can remember. I want people to read the book!
Hello and welcome to Outlook Bibliofile. Today we have with us India's first supermodel, an actor, a cancer survivor and a mother of twin daughters through surrogacy. She's just written her memoir called Close to the Bone, published by HarperCollins. Lisa Rani Ray, thank you so much for speaking to Outlook India. My first question stems from this very interesting episode from 2007-8 when you almost became a leading lady in one of the Bond films. Tell our audience a little bit about that.
Funny that that's the one thing that you should pick out of the book first. There's a lot that came before it and a lot that comes after. But I want to preface it with saying that there's this one interesting word that I emphasize in the book called serendipity. And serendipity is when wonderful things happen more or less by chance or accident. And pretty much most of my life has been ruled by serendipity. And so, having said that, serendipity suddenly threw me into the situation where I was, one of the last three actresses being auditioned for one of the Bond films. And believe me, I'd never even seen a Bond film. And that's what I actually told the studio heads when they called me in to talk about it. And of course I'd heard of it. Of course, I knew it was a great opportunity, but it was kind of surreal when you feel like you stepped into somebody else's dream or somebody else's life, And I've tried to write about that entire experience candidly, but also with hopefully my trademark humor, and also a sense of awareness about, the entire situation that I found myself in. Even at the end when I obviously didn't get it, the sense that I knew that this path wasn't quite for me, so it was okay, but it was kind of, I don't know, you've read it. Do you think it's kind of like a funny story as well?
It is. Particularly the fact that you appreciated, or rather went on to appreciate Daniel Craig's shoes. Please shed some more light on that.
No, I want people to read the book. Don't give away the punchline, yaar. Let's just say it's a very, very cool little insight, I think, and also into the entire process of being shortlisted for a Bond film.
Yeah, and alongside Lisa was Gal Gadot, the future Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I didn't know it at the time though.
Yeah. All right. My next question, of course, is about the fact that you have dedicated just about 40 pages to you surviving cancer, and it relapsed as well. This was after you got married. One perhaps serious question out of everything that I have read. Were there occasions when you felt that everything that you had built over the past 2 decades, your career, your loved ones, your family, your parents that you are very close to, and now your husband, of course, all this could just come to a halt at the snap of a finger? Were there occasions when you felt so low?
So I have to emphasize that, of course, what I've written about in Close to the Bone is my initial diagnosis, not my relapse. So the book basically ends at my marriage. So my husband wasn't, part of my the first phase of my cancer journey. Now, this is a complex answer. It's a complex question, a complex answer, because I don't have a simple, straightforward way of explaining how I got through my cancer diagnosis with, a relatively serious disease, and even why I decided to go public, which is why I wrote the book. I do think that I go into it in fair amount of detail and frankness and truthfulness about my entire experience, and some humor as well sprinkled in. But one thing I do want to say is that one of the reasons why I wrote the book also is because I realized that I cannot write about my disease in isolation from the rest of my life, that everything is connected to what came before. I did not feel, I want to also say that because I have also, my spiritual questing has been a very integral part of my life, or let's just say asking questions about maybe the deeper, the bigger question, the bigger issues of life has always been important to me. And because of that, I've come across some really interesting teachers and mentors and spiritual teachers. And perhaps they infused me with something that gave me a certain resilience, that gave me a certain amount of objectivity, the ability to be in my treatment and yet almost be outside of it and watch it. That's the best way I have of describing it now. But to get the full report and to get the full story, you're going to have to read the book Close to the Bone.
Certainly, most certainly. Lisa, going back to your childhood days, one of the major reasons, perhaps referring to your previous interviews, I realized that one of the major reasons why you don't want this to be a cancer memoir is because your relationship with books dates back to your childhood days.
Yes.
You were maintaining your journals at a very young age. Tell us a little bit about your experience back then. Were you at that point in time aware of the fact that there was a writer in you, or this particular disease basically triggered the writer in you?
No. I think I have always aspired to be a writer. That was it. If you asked me at 6, at 10, at 16, even at 26, even up until recently, what do you actually want to do? What is your real calling? I would have said writer. Aside from, of course, my experiments with spirituality and with truth and with understanding life deeper. These are probably the two driving forces in my life. And perhaps they both kind of complement each other. So I wanted to be a writer since I can remember. But before that, I was also a reader, and I was a really relentless reader. I would just devour books, and even today I devour words and sentences, and they're just so yummy, and I keep lists of words that I come across that please me and that I don't quite know the meaning to, but I figure I'll use them in a sentence one day or in a book. So I've always had that, maybe that intention in the back of my head that one day I'll write a book, because I've always kept journals and notes. But that's also the way that I've processed my life. My life is a bit surreal and bizarre.
Absolutely.
For sure it is. So writing has always helped me to understand it, to maybe also gain that observer's objectivity about the strange things that I've lived through and the experiences, and to really digest them as well. So I always felt that I would be a writer. I've been preparing for this moment for 30 years of my life, and finally it's come true. Never wanted to be an actress, never wanted to be in front of the camera. That was all an accident.
All right. You call it an accident. Interesting, because you ventured into the fashion industry at a very young age. You were perhaps 16 or 17. Your career spans almost 3 decades now. I want to understand from Lisa how things have changed in India, because you've been a frequent visitor. This is one country that is perhaps the closest to your heart. At least the sense that I derived after reading the portion of the book, I got it that you've been a frequent visitor. You've always inclined a little bit towards your father more than your mother's side. Lisa's mother, by the way, is from Poland and father from West Bengal, but of course they got married and they got settled in Canada.
Yes.
So shed some more light on the fact on how you have seen India change over the past 3 decades, because you entered the industry at 16, 17, and today we are discussing your memoir.
Exactly. That's a great question. But also let me say, that's again why I wrote the book. I think that you'll have to read the book to get, again, the full kind of depth that I've, or to get the immersive experience.
Yeah, certainly, most certainly.
But yes, of course. I mean, when I really, my career started in 1991 along with the economy opening up. It's kind of like blossomed simultaneously, you can say. When I came, it was still a socialist economy. There were no credit cards. There was no mortgages. There was, I got paid in bags of cash, and then I would be calling up my friends and saying, "What do I do with this cash? What do I put in?" People were stuffing cash under their mattresses, and then, and then getting raided. It was such a different dynamic. But the industry, of course, was fashion was still at its infancy. So I do feel a sense of pride of having been part of at least the core group of people who were kind of establishing the foundation for the fashion industry in India. But it's an extraordinarily creative time. We didn't have managers. We didn't have PR. We were our own managers, our own lawyers, negotiated our own contracts, and travel as well, which is a nightmare sometimes. But we had a very sort of family kind of a connection and bond. It wasn't as cut and dry transactional business as it is today. Now, there's a good and bad aspect to both things. Look, I love my team today, and I would not change that for the world, because of course released me of the burden of having to deal with all the admin and be a creative person, which was, there was just so much going on. I still remember also when I was shooting Kasur, my dialogues were being scribbled in a corner of the studio, I forget Vanity Fan, I only had like this really stinky green room, So it was so much of the kind of, the trappings that we have today was just not there. But we didn't think about it because, we just got down to it and worked. But it was an extraordinarily creative time in fashion and in ads in the 90s. Not so much for film. Today, of course, the tables have turned. I think that from what I see, the advertising industry is really a little bit stale. You can't even remember an ad that you saw yesterday, but all the talent and all the vision has now been funneled into films, and I would venture to say into digital content. I think digital content is really leading the charge in terms of the revolution today. So it's a really interesting time in India. Really good and bad aspects of both. But having said that, I'm glad that I experienced the 90s because I think it was a very special time. We'll never go back to that period of innocence. You can never unlearn certain things. And there was a kind of a magic. And those friends that I made are still my close friends today because they were very, very real bonds. It wasn't like, hey, let's get together for dinner and you don't really mean it. I mean, we really grew together as human beings and we really had each other's back.
What about the status of women in the industry now? It's always been a subject of discussion, debate that women have not been paid equally. They've not really had the say as far as characters are concerned. Because you've seen it all, we wish to understand a little bit from you. Just a little bit.
There's been a lot of advances. Having said that, I think I've written about it, my perspective on it, in Close to the Bone. How even in the 90s, when, let's say, the misogyny and the patriarchy was, still exerting a very dominating influence on films, in the film arena, there was still a way that, I believe that Indian women are extraordinarily strong and extraordinarily capable and very dynamic and very smart. So even then, women were still somehow getting their way, but you had to be extraordinarily strong to deal with and develop a thick skin. Today, I think we have more of a tribe and a community. We have a lot more of a support system, and social media has definitely helped that. The fact that we're talking about the status of women, the fact that we're speaking very openly about pay parity or the Me Too movement, I think is a really, really positive thing. The point is to bring all of these issues out of the shadows and just have a dialogue about it. I believe in India. I believe ultimately that things are going to move forward in a positive direction. Despite what anyone might say or think, I'm maybe a delusional optimist. But it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to be ongoing work, and it's going to take a lot of dialogue and discussion, and sometimes people saying no and standing your ground, and being uncompromising sometimes, even when it affects you negatively. That's the toughest thing, to be an activist in any sort of way. That's not easy to do, to say, because of my sense of integrity, I'm going to say no to this project, and then someone else slips into it. But you have to be truthful to yourself ultimately.
In Close to the Bone, going back to your family now, in Close to the Bone, you start off with how your mom and dad, got together. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Sweet,
very, very beautiful story.
I think it is. I think they were incredibly rebellious and also incredibly in love, and that combination was quite combustible because they defied both of their cultural backgrounds to come together and build a life on their own terms. My father was basically sort of excommunicated from his family for a certain period of time. And even my mother's family was very suspicious of this brown-skinned boy who was wooing their daughter. My mother was an only child. It's very beautiful, but I also realized that they passed on this rebellious spirit to me. And we don't always see our parents in those terms. I did not initially.
My next question was going to be that you're answering.
Yeah, we don't see our parents in those terms. So that was a revelation in reframing my parents as individuals, not just as mummy and daddy, and seeing how brave and how strong and also how graceful they were, you know, how quietly courageous they were. That was beautiful to rediscover my parents in this new way. I think they deserve their own book, to be honest, for everything that they've been through and the life that they built. But I think that also the other thing, of course, is that for an interracial marriage was a very brave thing at that point of time. There were just not that many. Fortunately, the world has changed today, and there's a lot more creatures like me. But, you know, that was a double-edged sword because I did not really have any other reference points. There were very few other half Polish Bengali kids around, and actually, to be honest, there's still very few half Polish Bengali kids around. Yeah. But, you know, I didn't know where I fit in the world, and it led to a lot of identity issues. But for whatever reason, I was always aligned with my Indian side. But, you know, never fully being embraced as an Indian. And when I'm outside India, I'm definitely not identified as white or Polish or even Canadian or anything. So where do I fit in the world? I've now become very comfortable with fitting everywhere and nowhere.
Is that because you say that you don't like permanent addresses?
Maybe. I mean, I haven't helped it. For sure not. Yeah. I haven't helped the matters. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Probably my last question. I just want to understand, because you've said repeatedly that you don't want this to be known as a cancer memoir. Yes. And you've also said that probably you're going to write another book on that journey,
and a few other books after that.
Most certainly, we wish you all the luck, and we need more writers who talk about these things in open. Just want to understand if that book will be called The Cancer or I Had Cancer, and you know the reason why I'm asking this.
Yes, I do. That's cute. That's sweet. I don't know. The title is going to have to come last. I mean, I wrote this entire book and then realized, I don't have a title. So the title will have to probably come out of the narrative.
Why don't you tell our audience quickly why did I mention The Cancer?
Why don't you tell them?
I don't want to tell them. I want you to.
No, why don't we tell them to buy the book?
Absolutely.
And that you enjoyed the book and you think it's well written and that I should write more books.
Absolutely.
Come on, you tell them.
I can actually tell, you know, I've read a fair bit of this, and it makes for a riveting read. I'm going to finish it, of course. I'm not going to claim that I've read the entire book. But Lisa Ray, absolutely fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this platform, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And next week, hopefully, a new writer and a new book.